Hi guys, in some of my spiritual growth videos, I talked about the importance of living through the Spirit. And I said that you have to live in Christ Jesus. You in Him, He in you. But how do you do it? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. It's going to be an interesting one, so let's get to it. Now, just very quick, if it's the first time that you're here on my channel, I'm Daniel and welcome to DLM Christian Lifestyle. If you haven't subscribed yet, then please consider it and also click the notification bell so you won't miss any of the next videos. So, how do you do it? How do you live in God? You in Him, He in you, in a deep relationship. Well, let's start by looking at the first verse. Romans 6 verse 6. We know that our old self, he's talking about the person you used to be before you were a reborn Christian. We know that our old self was crucified with Him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. For one who has died has been set free from sin. Now, if we have died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with Him. The day you accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior, you became a reborn Christian. You are spiritually reborn and you received the Holy Spirit in you. Jesus said in John 3 verse 5, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." And Ephesians 1 verse 13 says, "In Him you also, when you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, and believed in Him, were sealed with the promised Holy Spirit." You were spiritually dead because of your sins. Before you became a Christian, you could not understand the spiritual truths of God until He revealed it to you. Ephesians 2 verse 1 says, "You were dead in the trespasses and sins." You and I were like the rest of the world, the unbelievers, dead men and women walking with no spiritual life. And we could not understand anything about God. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14 says, "The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them, because they are spiritually discerned." Now let's go back a few verses to see the impact of the Holy Spirit in believers. Verse 9 says, "But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts, except the spirit of that person which is in him?" Now listen to the next verse, which is very important. "So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God." And now, as a child of God, you have the Spirit of God in you, the Holy Spirit. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given us by God. And we impart this in words, not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. Do you understand now why I always quote John 4 verse 24, which says, "God is Spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth." So Jesus does not live in you directly, because He's sitting at the right hand of God, the Father. Luke 22 verse 69 says, "But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And Jesus will stay there until His second coming. He will not come down before then and live in every single person here on earth. He's sitting at the right hand of God the Father, but He lives in us through the Spirit. And Jesus explained this ahead of time. John 14 verse 16, "And I will ask the Father, and He will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees Him nor knows Him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. So, as reborn Christians, we know the Holy Spirit because he lives in us. Now, look at how Jesus brings this all together. Verse 18, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Yet a little while and the world will see me no more. But you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. In that day you will know that I am in my Father and you in me and I in you. So the Holy Spirit represents Jesus, the Son, and God the Father in us. Galatians 4 verse 6 beautifully says, and because you are sons, God has sent, listen to this, the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So through the Holy Spirit, we now have a deep personal relationship with God the Father and Jesus. The Spirit connects us with Jesus Christ, and now we are one with Him. 1 Corinthians 6 verse 17 says, but he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with Him. But you should always remember that we also have a sinful nature in us, a fleshly nature. But now, because we have a new spiritual nature, the Holy Spirit in us, we need to let the Holy Spirit guide us, our soul, to act according to God's will and not act through our own fleshly desires. Romans 6 verse 6 says, we know that our old self was crucified with Him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing. So the correct Greek translation here does not really say that it is nothing, but that the body of sin might be inactive or ineffective. The CSB translated it more correctly, saying that the body ruled by sin might be rendered powerless, so that we may no longer be enslaved to sin, since a person who has died is freed from sin. So we are now dead to sin because we reckon our old sinful fleshly natures as dead to sin. So we are dead to sin. The sinful nature in us is powerless when we act through faith and in the Spirit. And we only experience its powerlessness when we act out of faith from the fact that we died with Christ. Verse 8 says, now if we died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with Him, because we know that Christ, having been raised from the dead, will not die again. Death no longer rules over Him. For the death He died to sin once for all time. But the life He lives to God. So you too consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. So sin and death has no power over us if we reckon our old sinful natures as dead and alive in Christ. Death can't do anything to us because we have a new spirit in us. Our bodies will die, but we will continue to live with Christ. Jesus died for your sins. And when you understand it, when you reckon it as true, then your life with Him begins. But as you continue with Him to live in the Spirit, you start to realize, wait a minute, Jesus did not just die for me, but I died. That person I used to be died with Christ. That is what water baptism represents. Romans 6 verse 3 says, do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into His death? We were buried, therefore, with Him by baptism into death, in order that, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. Now listen very carefully. If you reckon your old sinful nature as dead, through faith, through the spiritual nature in you, it has no power over you. And so you don't act from it or react from your sinful fleshly nature. No, you now act from the spiritual nature in you. And now the Holy Spirit brings forth the life of Christ in you and through you. It all happens with the Holy Spirit. John says in 1 John 3 verse 24, whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. Now listen very carefully to the next important words. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. So you are in God. You in him, he in you. And we have all the same Spirit in us as brothers and sisters in Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body. Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. So you have to understand that we connect with God, we communicate with him through the Spirit. Everything happens through the Spirit. And if you don't act through the Spirit, if you act from your old self again, then you can sin. But if you act through the spiritual nature in you, then you will not sin. Galatians 5 verse 16 says, but I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So the fleshly nature is not just old bad habits that you changed. No, it is a sinful, evil nature in us, in all of us. And we won't be rid of it in this life. We will only be rid of it when we are with Christ after this life. And these two natures will always be in you, and they will fight each other. Verse 17 says, for the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. So if you are led by the Spirit, you will always walk within God's will. Why? Because His Spirit guides you. And if His Spirit guides you, if you walk by the Spirit, then you are not under the old law. Now, if you don't know and if you don't understand what the Bible means when it says that we are not under the law anymore, then please watch the video on my channel where I talk about this. I'll add it for you in the video description so you can check it out and watch it later. So you have two natures in you. You have a sinful nature and a new spiritual nature. That's an absolute truth. Just like the law of gravity. The law of gravity states that if you drop something, it will fall. Just like this Bible, if I drop it, it will fall. And just like it, you will fall in sin if you act from your old, fleshly, sinful nature. And you will overcome it when you act through the new spiritual nature. This is the new law in you, the law of the Spirit. Romans 8 verse 1 says, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. So just like the law of gravity, you now have a new law in you, the law of the Holy Spirit. And if you have God's Spirit in you, then you will automatically bring forth good fruit, good deeds. This is what it means to really have a relationship with God and to really live life. Galatians 2 verse 19 says, for through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. This whole new life in Christ is a life of faith. But now you understand what this faith really means. Christ died for you, for your sins. But not only that, you died with Him, and you reckon your old sinful nature as dead. And Christ now lives in you through the Spirit. How amazing is that? And if you want to know more about this, what does it mean when the Bible really says that we are not under the law anymore, but we are now under the law of the Spirit? And what is the difference between the Spirit and the soul? Then please watch these videos here, and I'll see you there. And always remember, God loves you, and I love you too. Bye.
Take my life and let consecrated, Lord, to thee.